Aisha had always believed her marriage to Zeeshan was solid, even if not perfect. They had built a comfortable life in their quiet suburban neighborhood, where neighbors exchanged polite smiles and weekends were spent attending family dinners. But lately, a quiet emptiness had begun to seep into her days, like an uninvited shadow that refused to leave. Zeeshan, a regional sales manager, was often away for work. His trips could stretch for days, sometimes weeks. When he was home, his mind seemed tethered to his phone or laptop, chasing targets and answering late-night calls. Aisha understood the demand of his job, yet each missed dinner, each distracted nod to her stories, etched another fine crack in the glass of their connection. That Saturday morning, the squeak of the garden gate sliced through the silence of the house. The sound was familiar, sharp, metallic, and long ignored. Aisha had asked Zeeshan several times to fix it, but the problem never ranked high enough on his list. "I'll get to it next weekend," he would say. The weekends came and went, and the gate remained stubbornly crooked. The gate had become more than a simple annoyance. For Aisha, it was a small emblem of being overlooked, her requests pushed aside like clutter in a busy mind. She had stopped mentioning it, but each time she walked through, she felt the resistance of the hinge like a quiet protest. That morning, she decided to take matters into her own hands. As she trimmed the hedges in the yard, her neighbor Mrs. Khan leaned over the fence, a basket of freshly picked lemons in her hands. "Why don't you call Omar?" Mrs. Khan suggested. "He fixed our patio door last week. Fast, polite, and not too expensive." Aisha hesitated. She had never hired a handyman before, but the thought of finally silencing that irritating squeak was tempting. She took Omar's number and, after a moment of consideration, dialed. His voice on the other end was warm and confident. "I can drop by this afternoon and take a look," he said. True to his word, a few hours later, he appeared at her front door. Omar was in his early 30s, with a calm, approachable demeanor. His work clothes were clean but worn, his hands marked by the subtle stains of his trade. He greeted her with a nod and immediately walked to the gate, inspecting it with the practiced eye of someone who had fixed 100 like it. "This is an easy one," he said, flashing a quick smile. "Just needs the right tools and a little patience." Aisha found herself oddly reassured by his certainty. As he left to gather his equipment for the next day, she noticed something unusual. For the first time in a while, she felt a flicker of anticipation. She told herself it was only because the gate would finally be fixed. But deep down, a part of her wondered if that was entirely true. The next afternoon arrived warmer than expected, sunlight spilling across the garden in a golden haze. Aisha heard the hum of an engine outside, and moments later, Omar appeared at the gate with a well-worn toolbox in hand. "Good afternoon, madam," he greeted, polite yet relaxed. His voice carried the same calm assurance she had noticed before. He crouched beside the gate, pulling out an assortment of wrenches and screwdrivers. Aisha lingered nearby, telling herself she was simply there to answer any questions about the repair. But as the minutes passed, she found herself watching the way he worked, steady, methodical, and focused. There was something grounding in his presence, something that contrasted sharply with Zeeshan's hurried, distracted manner. They began with small talk, comments about the weather, the flowers in her garden, the stubbornness of old wood. Soon, Omar shifted the conversation to ask about her roses, noting the deep crimson blooms along the fence. "You've taken good care of them," he said, glancing up briefly. Plants know when someone tends them with patience. The remark caught her off guard. It was such a simple statement, yet it felt strangely personal, as if he had noticed more than just her garden. She replied lightly, but her thoughts lingered on his words. Half an hour passed in a rhythm of quiet work and occasional conversation. Aisha brought him a glass of cold lemonade, their fingers brushing briefly as she handed it over. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a subtle ripple through her. She tried to ignore it, but the sensation seemed to hum beneath her skin. Omar told her a story about a job gone wrong, a mismeasured window frame that had to be replaced at his own expense. His laugh was easy, self-deprecating, and it drew an answering smile from her, wider than she had worn in weeks. As the afternoon wore on, the gate began to look straighter, sturdier. Omar tested the hinges, tightening them with practiced precision. "It's coming along nicely," he said, glancing toward her again with that same quick smile. Aisha nodded, but her mind was not on the gate. She noticed the quiet way he listened when she spoke, the small acknowledgments that told her he was paying attention, not just her words, but to her. By the time he packed up his tools, the light was beginning to soften. "I'll need to come back tomorrow for the final adjustments," he told her. "Shouldn't take long." She thanked him, standing at the doorway as he walked away. The sound of his footsteps faded, but the feeling he left behind did not. As she closed the door, Aisha realized she was already looking forward to tomorrow, not for the finished gate, but for something she wasn't ready to name. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from a garden. Aisha rose earlier than usual, telling herself she had chores to finish before Omar arrived. Yet, as she stood before the mirror, adjusting her scarf and smoothing the folds of her dress, she couldn't ignore the quiet flutter of anticipation. By mid-morning, the sound of footsteps on the path announced his arrival. Omar greeted her with a nod, his eyes briefly meeting hers before he turned to the gate. He knelt down, laying out his tools with the care of a craftsman preparing for his final strokes. "This won't take long," he said, tightening the bolts. "Just a matter of precision now." Aisha remained nearby, offering him tea as he worked. Their conversation drifted beyond garden repairs. Omar spoke about his childhood in a coastal town, the way the sea changed colors with the seasons, and how he missed the sound of waves at night. In return, Aisha shared how she used to paint but had stopped after marriage, her brushes gathering dust in a drawer. When she mentioned feeling a little unseen lately, Omar's gaze lifted, his expression softening. Sometimes, he said, quietly, people don't realize the value of what they have until it's too late. The words settled between them like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples neither dared to name. A gust of wind swept through the yard, lifting the edge of her scarf. Omar reached out instinctively, catching the fabric before it could fall to the ground. For a brief second, his hand lingered and their eyes locked. The moment was fragile, yet charged, as if any movement might shatter it entirely. Then, the crunch of footsteps on gravel broke the spell. Mrs. Khan was walking past with her shopping bag, offering them both a friendly wave. Aisha stepped back quickly, her cheeks warming, while Omar returned to his work in silence. The rest of the repair passed in measured quiet. The gate now swung open smoothly, the squeak gone as if it had never existed. Omar tested it twice, then set his tools aside. "All done," he said, finally dusting his hands. "You won't have any more trouble with it." Aisha thanked him, her voice even, though inside she felt unsettled. She knew nothing inappropriate had happened, yet the boundary between harmless familiarity and something deeper had thinned dangerously. As Omar lifted his toolbox, he hesitated for a heartbeat, as if wanting to say more. Instead, he simply nodded and walked toward the street. From the doorway, Aisha watched him go, the repaired gate standing silent behind her. She wondered if the sound she heard in her chest was relief, or the first crack of something about to break. Zeeshan returned earlier than expected on a Wednesday evening, his suitcase rolling softly across the tiled floor. The house felt warmer than usual, the faint scent of freshly brewed tea lingering in the air. Aisha greeted him with a polite smile, though her voice carried a hesitation she couldn't quite hide. He noticed the new ease of the garden gate as he stepped outside to take a call. "When did this get fixed?" he asked over dinner. "Yesterday," she replied, keeping her tone light. "Omar finished it." The name seemed to catch in his mind. Later that night, as Aisha tidied the kitchen, Zeeshan stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I heard you on the phone earlier," he said evenly. "You sounded different. Who were you speaking to?" Her hands paused over the dishes. "It was Omar," she admitted. "He was just letting me know the work was complete." But Zeeshan's expression told her he wasn't convinced. "Aisha, have you been keeping something from me?" The question was heavy, its weight pressing against the space between them. She swallowed hard. "No, not in the way you think. But I suppose I have let someone see a side of me you haven't noticed in a long time. The words hung in the air, soft but unyielding. Zeeshan's jaw tightened. You could have told me you felt neglected. You didn't need to look elsewhere for that. Aisha's chest ached at the truth in his voice. She wanted to say it was harmless, that Omar had simply listened when she needed to speak. But she knew that in Zeeshan's eyes, the damage had already been done. The next afternoon, Omar arrived to return a misplaced tool. Zeeshan was home, standing beside Aisha when she opened the door. Omar's eyes flickered between them, his usual warmth replaced by quiet understanding. He offered a polite nod, placed the wrench on the table, and left without another word. As the sound of his footsteps faded, Aisha felt an odd hollowness. It wasn't longing, it was the sharp awareness of what her choices had cost her. The days that followed were quieter. Zeeshan spoke less, though his presence was heavier. Aisha tried to bridge the distance with small gestures, freshly brewed tea, shared walks in the garden, but the ease between them had been replaced by something cautious, almost fragile. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Aisha looked at the garden gate. It stood straight now, swinging without resistance, its hinges silent. Yet she couldn't escape the thought that some doors, once opened, could never be closed the same way again. She turned to Zeeshan. "I'm sorry," she said simply. He didn't reply, but after a long pause, his hand rested lightly on hers. The gesture wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. And as the night settled in, Aisha understood a truth she would carry forward. Sometimes, the smallest crack in a relationship lets in a storm strong enough to wash everything away.